we've been talking about how we can live as human beings in such a way where our roots are firm, our foundation is firm, and our branches reach towards the sky. How does that look like, or what does that look like in our lives? That looks like, number one, having a healthy foundation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also having a healthy foundation in our overall health. I spend a lot of time talking about different types of health, because oftentimes when we think about spiritual health, we compartmentalize, right? We think of spiritual health as simply someone who recites a lot of Quran, someone who prays a lot, someone who fasts, someone who gives charity, and is involved in these rituals, which is all true. But what I wanted to convince you of, what I wanted to get across, is that overall health has to also include mental, spiritual, and emotional health, because we are one human being, right? We don't have a separate compartment for our soul that is separate than our mind, that is separate than our heart, that is separate than our body, that is separate than our life experience. We are not separate from our childhoods. We are not separate from our environments. We are not separate from the way we were raised. And we are not separate from the way that we think. We are also not separate from the way that we feel. So all of these things have to be seen as one piece, holistically. Because I truly believe that one of the reasons we suffer, now suffering can come from various different places. So the question of healing the emptiness is essentially a question of suffering. Why do we suffer? Are we supposed to be suffering in this life? Is suffering an inevitable part of dunya? And what I argue is that tests are an inevitable part of dunya, but suffering is not supposed to be. And that suffering is more of what happens when we don't heed the warnings. Now, what are the warnings in our life? Let's go back to the example of the tree. What's a warning that there's a problem with the roots, or there's a problem with the soil? We are gonna see a problem in the fruit, right? The fruit is gonna be unhealthy. The leaves are gonna be unhealthy. And so you see that that's a sign. But if you have an unhealthy fruit and unhealthy leaves, how do you solve that problem? Well, treat the leaves, right? Treat the fruit, right? What's the answer? Treat the roots. You have to heal the roots. You have to heal the soil. The fruit having a problem in it, the leaves having a problem in it, is only a sign. It's a symptom of a deeper issue. Does that make sense? And so when you see those signs and say you ignore them, and instead maybe you try to just, I don't know, do something with the leaves, maybe paint them, maybe they're unhealthy and you paint them a certain color to make them look healthy. So maybe they're turning brown, but you paint them green. Have you solved the problem of the tree? No, you haven't. You have to heal at the root. And this is what we do as human beings, is that holistically, we will see signs of unhealthiness. We will see signs of lack of health. But many times we don't heed the signs. We don't listen to the signs. And instead we look for cosmetic sort of ways to address it or to hide it, right? So what are some examples of signs that there's a problem with the root? Well, one example is if I find myself, for example, I find myself not wanting to obey Allah, or I find it very difficult to obey Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to fast in Ramadan, and I find it very difficult to obey Him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to wear hijab, and I find it very difficult to obey Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says stay away from certain haram things, stay away from riba, stay away from haram relationships, that I find it difficult to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is actually a sign. And the solution to that is what? Where do I have to look? At the roots, at the roots. So one sign that there is a spiritual, almost like malnourishment, or a spiritual disease even, is that when I find it very difficult to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now that doesn't mean any of us can ever obey Allah perfectly. That would mean that we are not human, that would mean that we are angels. Remember the example of the Prophet ﷺ when he said, to Abu Bakr and Hanzala, when they said, we've become hypocrites. And when he asked them why, they said, because when we are with you in your presence, it's as if we see Jannah and Jahannam with our eyes, but when we go to our families, we're not at that same level of Iman. And he said to them, if your Iman remained the same all the time as when you're with me, the angels would shake hands with you in the streets. In other words, you would be an angel, not a human. So it's important that we're not talking here about perfection. We're not talking here about living some sort of angelic, sinless existence. It's impossible. But we're talking about, by and large, the ability to do our best to obey Allah as humans. If we find that it is very difficult to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we have to go and see what is the issue with the root. Maybe it's an issue with the soil. Maybe it's something in the environment that is causing that. And so we have to heed these signs. Another sign, and now I'm looking right now at spiritual issues, okay? Another sign that there is something maybe unhealthy in the roots is when I have a lot of difficulty accepting the decree of Allah. I have a lot of difficulty accepting the decisions of Allah when they don't go in line with my decision or my desire. So the first one that I gave, the first example I gave, was I have difficulty putting aside my own desire for what Allah wants. So I have difficulty obeying Allah when it goes against my desire. That's the first sign of something that needs to be addressed in the root, in the soil. The second is when I have difficulty accepting the will of Allah, and I want my will. I want my desire, and I have difficulty accepting Allah's choices for me. His qadar, my qadar, and the decisions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in my life. That's also a sign that there's something that needs to be addressed in the roots. Now, what does that mean? Sometimes things will happen that we don't like. Does that ever happen to you? Sometimes we get things that we don't want, and sometimes we lose things that we desperately want. Yes or no? And then sometimes we will have to watch people around us getting the things that we want and we don't get. Sometimes we have to watch while we might lose something and someone else has it still. And these are all part of the tests of this world, aren't they? And we live in a world now where we can see what everyone has because of social media. We can compare everything. I mean, you can compare your burger to other people's burgers. You can compare what you're eating to what everyone else is eating at any given time. What you're drinking. How does your smoothie look compared to their smoothie, right? You got my point? You can compare your spouse to everyone else's, your children to everyone else's, your body to everyone else's, your skin, your color, your life, your vacations, right? Your children's level of being a hafiz to everyone else's children. You understand? And so we live in a world where there's so much access to constant comparisons. And sometimes we're not pleased with the decision of Allah. We don't accept the decision of Allah. We're not happy with the decision of Allah. Allah has chosen that He has given certain blessings to others and not to you. Or He has given certain tests to you that He hasn't given to others. But I will say this, one thing to keep in mind is social media obviously is very deceptive. But one thing to know about the reality of dunya is that every single person has blessings and every single person has tests. Got that? Everyone has blessings, even the atheist, right? Allah still lets them breathe. Allah still gives them water and food and wealth and children. Everyone has blessings. Even the non-Muslim has blessings in this life. This is what Ar-Rahman is, by the way. In Surah Al-Fatiha, you say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahman is that rahmah, the mercy and the compassion that is general. So even a disbeliever gets from that. That's what allows even the disbeliever to be given a drop of water, to continue to live in safety, to have food, to have children, to have wealth, to have enjoyment. That's rahmah. That's Ar-Rahman. But Ar-Rahim is specific and exceptional to the believer. So Allah is both. Allah has the general rahmah, and Allah has the specific and exceptional rahmah for the believer, and that's Ar-Rahim. He's both. So everyone has blessings, but everyone also has tests. Now the problem with the human being by and large is that we tend, listen to this, we tend to focus on our tests and not our blessings. And when we look at others, we tend to focus on their blessings, but not even see their tests. Do you see that? Although when I look at my own life, I have this problem, and I have this problem, and I have this problem, and I have this issue, and I have this issue, and I have this missing, and I have this missing, right? But I don't look at what I have. I don't look at my blessings. My focus is on my problems. But when I look at others, especially on social media, and what they like to put out, or what I see of them, because this is what's apparent, what am I seeing? I'm seeing only their blessings. I'm seeing their fancy vacation, or their fancy car, or their fancy clothes, or their loving family that they put out there. But do I see their tests? No. And what does that breed? What does that bring about? I heard a few things, both accurate. Jealousy and ingratitude. Jealousy towards others and ingratitude towards your own self and your own life and your own blessings. So you see the problem, and this is that weakness in human nature, is that when we look at our own lives, we tend to focus on what's missing, what we don't like, the problems, and we don't look at the blessings. But as soon as we look at others, wow, they have this blessing, and they have this gift, and look at that, and look at this, and look at their house, and then we compare. And what it breeds is jealousy and ingratitude. And by the way, Jealousy and ingratitude are among two of the diseases of the heart. They will actually, the Prophet ﷺ said that envy, listen to this, envy will burn up good deeds like fire burns up wood. So we have to be careful, right? This is something we don't want. We don't want to have envy in our heart. And sometimes we might have it and we don't want it because it's very uncomfortable. It's actually, if you think about fire, who's it burning? Well, it's burning the one who holds it, first and foremost. Before you harm anyone else with your evil eye and your envy and your jealousy, you're hurting yourself because you're the one holding the fire, right? And so sometimes we might have that, and maybe we don't want that, especially if we are God conscious and we're believers. But what brings it about? How do we get rid of it? And the answer is we need to switch the focus. We need to switch the focus to our blessings instead of other people's blessings. And Allah tells us this in the Quran. He says, don't extend your eye to the blessings that He has given others. And sometimes those blessings, He says that those blessings that He's given to others, sometimes they're a test or even a punishment to those people. We don't know. But it's very important that we don't focus on other people's blessings because it can make us both envious and ungrateful. And instead what we should do is focus on our own blessings. Because what did we say at the beginning? Everyone has both. Got it? Everyone. There is not a single human being who does not have both. No matter how hard someone's life is, they still have blessings. We can think of the person who is struggling the most in the world. Think of the people in Gaza. Do they have blessings? They have Islam. Other people, they don't have Islam. Islam is the greatest blessing. They don't just have Islam. They have istiqamah. Istiqamah is the greatest nasr and blessing and help of Allah, is to be able to be established on deen. That's istiqamah. To be firm on your deen. That no matter what happens to you, your deen doesn't shake. That is the greatest blessing. And then there are people who have what we would consider so many blessings. But do they have tests? Absolutely. I mean, just look at the lives of celebrities. I mean, just look at the tabloids. Their lives are miserable sometimes. And that's just what we see. So we have to be mature enough, spiritually and emotionally and mentally mature enough to know that everyone has blessings and everyone has tests. And so do not ever focus your heart or your attention on the blessings of others, but rather shift to focusing on your own blessings. And I think this is also part of Ghadd al-Basar. You know what Ghadd al-Basar is? It's the guarding of the eyes, right? We're told to lower our gaze. You've heard this before, right? In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the believing men and the believing women, individually, by the way. There are some times where Allah will address the believers in general with a command. But in the case of lowering the gaze, He addresses men and then He addresses women separately. So the lowering of the gaze is a command, and it is in the Quran. But how do we understand lowering the gaze? Well, there's the obvious literal meaning of lowering the gaze. What is it? That if there is something haram, don't look at it, right? Do not look at the haram. Lower the gaze from the haram. And when you lower the gaze, you protect the chastity, Allah tells us. But there are other things too that we should lower our gaze from. And one of them is the blessings of others. We shouldn't be staring figuratively as well as literally at the blessings of others. For many reasons, by the way. One, we've already talked about, is that it can breed jealousy. Because things become skewed when you're focusing on the blessings of others. Because then you don't see their tests, and all of a sudden you think, why is their life perfect? Why am I the only one with problems? This is a deception. And it comes from the skewed obsession with, it's basically the skewed perception that comes from fixating on others. It's not a good habit. And unfortunately, we live in a culture that is all about that, isn't it? Absolutely. Every time we open our phone, it's like, what is she wearing? What is he doing? Who are they dating? Who are they divorcing? It's like all of the tabloids and the media, and whether that's social media or, any kind of media, it's all about other people's lives, right? Other people's drama. It's something we actively have to lower our gaze from. And when I say that, I don't only mean lowering your gaze from looking at indecent photos. Obviously there's that. But also lowering your gaze from fixating on other people's blessings. It actually can create a disease in your heart of jealousy and ingratitude. Because all of a sudden you become ungrateful for what you have. Someone else is parading what they have, and all of a sudden you don't like, someone else is parading their house, all of a sudden you don't like your house as much. Someone else is parading their car, all of a sudden you don't like your car as much. Someone else is parading their wife, their husband, all of a sudden, yours looks a little bit lesser, because it's fake. So this is very important. And so the lowering of the gaze is more than just looking away from indecent images. But this is all to protect the heart, right? This is part of protecting the heart. Everyone has blessings and everyone has tests. So understand that no matter how perfect something looks, it isn't. It isn't, because everyone's tested. So don't fixate on others' blessings, but actually focus on your own, okay? But if we find ourselves displeased with the decisions of Allah, I'm not pleased with who Allah chose for me, for my child, my spouse, my condition. I'm not pleased. This is a sign that there's something in the roots that needs to be addressed. Something in the soil. And we talk about sabr, right? What is sabr? I spent some time discussing some of the myths about sabr. There is the myth that sabr is drinking poison and keeping a smile on your face, right? Standing in the burning house and doing nothing. This is not sabr. This is not sabr. This is toxic cultural ideas of being passive. It comes from culture, doesn't come from Islam. There's another myth about sabr that says that sabr is to swallow your grief. That sabr is to swallow your emotions, to not feel sad, to not cry. This is also false, and I gave you evidence of this. Among the evidence is the prophets, peace be upon them, who had greater sabr than you or I, and they cried. We know the example of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when his children died. In specific, we know when Ibrahim, his son, died, and he was crying. And he says in the sound narration, the eyes shed tears, and the heart feels grief, but the tongue does not utter except what is pleasing to Allah. He's describing sabr. And it involves grief, and it involves feeling, it involves crying. Sabr doesn't mean you become a robot. Yaqub alayhi salam, we know he cried until he went blind. We know he had sabrun jameel, he had beautiful patience. So this is some of the myths about sabr. But what is sabr then? What is sabr? One of the meanings of sabr is that in situations that you cannot change, and I emphasize that, because when your house is on fire, there is something you can do to change it. Got it? When you are being abused, when you are being mistreated, when you're being oppressed, when anyone around you is being abused or mistreated or oppressed, that is something you can do to change it. And so we have to distinguish between these different situations. If your house is on fire, there's something you can do to stop it, to prevent it, to mitigate. But in cases where there is nothing you can do, you've been given a child who has special needs. You've lost a loved one, they have passed away. Is there anything you can do to bring that person back who has died? Absolutely nothing. In those cases, sabr is to accept the decree of Allah without anger against Allah, without resentment, without saying, why me? Without saying, it's not fair. How could you do this to me? That is not sabr. So sabr is to accept قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ وَمَا شَاءَ فَعَلَ. Allah has decreed, and whatever Allah decrees, whatever He wills, He does. That is sabr in cases where you cannot change the decree of Allah. Sabr is not that you're in the burning house and saying قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ مَا شَاءَ فَعَلَ. Yes, قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ مَا شَاءَ فَعَلَ, but you are also in a position where you should take action. It is not to be passive. So what does it mean to accept? It means that I might be in pain. The Prophet ﷺ was in pain when he lost his son and almost all of his children actually. But he accepted the decree of Allah. He says, but the tongue does not utter except what is pleasing to Allah. And so the question is, if I find myself angry about the decree of Allah and not accepting the decree of Allah and thinking that it's not fair, why does that person get to keep, their job? Why am I sick and that person's healthy? This is a sign that there's something in the roots that needs to be addressed. Okay? Now, what do we do to address the roots? What do we do to address the soil? Well, first of all, we have to understand that the master of the body is actually the qalb, the heart. So if we find a problem in the actions, in the state of the body, or the spiritual state, or any of these things, we have to go to the root, which is the qalb. So in the human being, so we said in the tree, the roots are, what's in the soil, the foundation. In the human, the roots are in the qalb, the heart. Okay, so when we talk about we have to go to the root and heal and fix the root, with the human, that means the heart. That means we have to fix the heart. Because the heart is the foundation. And the heart is where we connect to Allah. That is where we make those deep roots, where we have that foundation, is in the qalb, the heart. So it's a matter of addressing the heart. Now I'll give you an example. If the heart is not healthy, you're gonna see symptoms of that in the body, right? How do you keep the heart healthy? So there's a few things that I'll discuss about keeping the heart healthy. Just like the body, the heart requires certain things, okay? 1, what is the most essential need of the body? Oxygen, right? You can live without food and water for X amount of time, you cannot live without oxygen beyond a few moments. Oxygen. So just like the body, the heart, the spiritual self, requires oxygen. Okay? What is the oxygen of the heart? What is the oxygen of the spiritual self? Anyone? Connection through what specifically? Yes. So prayer specifically, dhikr generally. Dhikr. The remembrance of Allah is oxygen for the heart. Remember that. If you find that you're showing signs, as I mentioned a few, if you find that you're showing signs of disease in the heart, or a problem in the heart, or disease, or weakness, it's a sign, first and foremost, that you have to check the oxygen level. You have to check your level of dhikr. That's the first place you have to look. Just like with someone who comes into the ER, you have to check, are they breathing first, right? The doctor's gonna check, are they breathing? You have to check your dhikr first. You have to check your remembrance of Allah. How is it? How is it? How's your salah? That's checking the oxygen level. How's your salah? How's your Quran? How's your adhkar? How much do you remember Allah? And if you remember Allah, how's the quality? Because you look at oxygen and then you're like, okay, I'm breathing, but what's the quality of the air? That's the second question, isn't it? I mean, it's not the same thing if you're in fresh mountain air versus you're in, Cairo, right? Different level of quality of air, pollution. Now I say this, but at the same time, any air is better than no air though, right? Sometimes people are like, well, what's the point in praying? I don't even focus. Well, what's the point in praying? I don't understand what I'm saying. Well, you know that's shaitan talking to you. You know that's shaitan. Because shaitan's saying, essentially, I'll give you what shaitan is saying. Shaitan is saying to someone in Cairo, what's the point in breathing? The air is so polluted. So just don't breathe. Well, that's really brilliant way of killing me, right? Really quick. Yes, maybe it's not perfect, but it's still better than not breathing at all. Our salah won't be perfect, and maybe it's far from perfect, but it's still keeping us alive. And so, yes, you start off with air, right? Make sure you get in the air. You're praying 5 times a day, okay? That's the basic breathing, basic oxygen. And then you can talk about the quality. Like, okay, how do we improve the quality? Maybe we get an air purifier in our house, okay? Then you can talk about how do I improve the quality of my salah? And there's a lot that you can do for that. Understanding what you're saying, the basic part of salah will help you improve the quality of your salah. Just learning the meaning of Fatiha. Something you say 17 times a day, only 7 ayat. You can learn the meaning, even if it's not your language. That's something that you can learn. You can learn the basic parts of the salah. Allahu Akbar. Allah is greater. Not just Allah is great, Allah is greater. Greater than everything. Subhana Rabbiyal A'la, right? That when you are at the lowest place, you are glorifying Allah the Most High. And so on. Learning that is going to help you improve the quality of your salah. But remember, salah is oxygen. You can't give it up because it's not perfect. Right? Another thing that can improve the quality of your salah is improving the quality of your dhikr outside of salah. Right? I'll give you an example. The thing about salah is just like, it's like you're pressing play of everything that you kind of stored throughout the day. You know what I mean? Everything you thought about during the day, everything you talked about, everything you watched, right? Because say you're obsessed with something. Like maybe you're really worried about an exam. It's not a secret what you're going to think about when you say Allahu Akbar and you start praying. You can be thinking about the exam. Maybe you're really worried about one of your kids or all of your kids. What are you going to think about when you say Allahu Akbar? You're going to think about that thing you're worried about, right? So salah is an extension of who we are and what input we take outside of salah, right? It's not like we become a different human as soon as we say Allahu Akbar. We're just it's a manifestation, extension of the input, the food, if you will, that we ingest the rest of the day. You know what I mean? Like if you're ingesting really, really unhealthy, poisonous food throughout the day, that's what you're going to see play out in your salah. It's like, that's what you're going to see. You are what you eat, right? So it has to do with what are you taking in outside of salah. It has to do with what do you talk about? What do you worry about? What do you read about? What do you watch? What do you write about? So there are ways to improve your salah by changing things about the way you live outside of salah. And the more that you focus on Allah outside of salah, the easier it will be to focus on Allah inside of salah. And this is why we find our salahs different in Ramadan. We find our salah will be different when we're in certain states, right? When we're living our life differently. When you're in Mecca and Medina. Talk to me about that. When you go for Umrah. When you go for Umrah or Hajj. You're literally focusing on Allah the entire day. So it's not hard to focus on Allah inside your salah. Right? So it's just whatever you're focused on outside of your salah will become what you focus on inside of salah. So there are different ways to improve. But the oxygen of the qalb is the remembrance of Allah. This includes the adhkar, this includes the Quran. This is what keeps your spiritual self alive. Okay, that's step one. Absolutely the most essential. But the body also needs other things to be healthy, right? The body needs food and water. The body also needs to stay clean. You could be breathing beautiful air, eating beautiful food, drinking beautiful, drinks. But if you're like never taking a shower, or never washing your hands, or going in very dirty environments, you're not gonna be healthy. Make sense? And so spiritually, that has to do with istighfar. Istighfar is like taking a spiritual shower. What is istighfar? Repentance. So when we have to be repenting and cleaning the heart consistently, just like we have to clean our hands. Otherwise we get sick. Make sense? So istighfar is a big part of spiritual health. Just like washing your hands or taking a shower is a part of physical health. Okay, and then finally is the environment. You could be breathing healthy air, eating healthy food, drinking healthy drinks, washing your hands, taking lots of showers, but if you are always playing around in the dirt, that's just your environment day and night is just, it's like a child. You could be giving them a bath, giving them really healthy food and air and water, but then they go and they play in the mud. Well, what's going to happen? They're going to get dirty again, right? And if they're always playing with germs, they can get sick. So our environment also matters. Who are your closest friends? Who are your closest companions? Who are you married to? Who do you choose to marry? These are all very important questions because your environment affects you. Your environment affects your state. It affects your heart. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-mar'u ala dini khalilih." A person will be on the way of life, the way of living of their closest companion. So you have to be careful who you take as a khalil. That's your close companion. And that includes in marriage, and that includes in friendship, family. One other thing when it comes to environment is what you are reading, what you are watching, what you are listening to, and what you are speaking about. Those are all inputs into the heart. So you have to think about it as spiritual food. You are what you eat. If you are a person who only eats organic, you're going to be healthier than a person who only eats junk. Yeah? If you're a person who only eats organic, you're going to be healthier than someone who only drinks poison. So you have to be mindful of what input you're giving your heart. So who are you following on social media? That's part of your input. Who do you keep around you? What kind of material do you read? What kind of media do you watch? What images? What do you listen to? What do you talk about? What do you talk about with your friends? What do you talk about with your family? All of that is input. And if it's organic, you're going to be healthier. And if it's junk, or worse yet, poison, you're not going to be healthy. Does that make sense? So the heart is the collection of all these things. All right? So when we talk about, okay, I'm seeing a sign that there's something unhealthy. Maybe I'm having trouble obeying Allah. Maybe I'm having trouble accepting or being pleased with the decree of Allah. Now that doesn't mean I don't have maybe grief or pain, but I accept. This is the sort of the fundamental for a believer. And there's higher levels than just acceptance. For example, in this case, rida, contentment, is a higher level even than just acceptance and sabr. But acceptance and sabr is the fundamental basic for a believer. I don't have to necessarily be happy about the decision of Allah, but I accept it, and I know that Allah knows best. Okay, so going back to the root to fix. If I see a sign that there is an illness, if I find myself always jealous, that's a sign. If I find myself ungrateful, these are signs that there's stuff I have to fix in the qalb, in the caretaking of the qalb, right? The oxygen, how's my dhikr? The cleanliness, how's my istighfar? Am I showering or am I not showering? Am I not washing my hands? Right? Am I cleaning the heart? And number 3, how's my environment? What kind of environment? Is it clean or is it really dirty? And what type of food, what type of input do I give my heart? Am I eating junk or poison, or am I eating healthy, organic? What type of things do I look at day and night? Do I watch? Do I listen to? Do I speak about?